Hi, and welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials, where we take a look at some everyday cybersecurity lessons that we can learn from this week's ThreatTraq stories. I'm here with Andy Benavides, and you're on the show this week, Andy. Welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials.
Thanks, Tom.
So let's talk about some of the stories that we covered this week. The first one that we had Stan brought to us was about a really sophisticated form of malware called titanium. Without getting into too much of the technical details about it, tell me what was so unusual about it.
So most malware is a single file, or it's a single file that then goes and gets another file from the internet. But the point being is it's one or two components. What made this particular malware interesting is it's a bunch of different components. So when you get a piece of malware on your system, it does a number of different things, 5 or 6 different things. It downloads a file here, executes a file here, and whatnot. And
it looks like malware when it does that.
And it looks like malware. To antivirus systems, they can identify that's malware because it's kind of contained in one thing. But what this malware does is it breaks the different components, the different actions it takes into different pieces. So it makes it harder for a system, an antivirus system, to identify that this is malware and needs to be removed.
So for the average person out there who may not encounter this particular kind of sophisticated malware, what's a takeaway message, a lesson we can learn from this?
Don't get that malware. I think it's the most important lesson. And it's important to know that this particular, I would say that advanced malware like this tends to be delivered via a spear phishing campaign, which basically means an email is sent to you that has been researched to make it look like it belongs to you and it's for you.
It's targeted right at you.
Targeted right at you, so it may use lingo that you're familiar with, maybe that your job is familiar with, that you may have exposed to, like with a LinkedIn profile or on Facebook or something. So the point is that it's an email that's very targeted to you and most likely has an attachment or something, like a Word document or a PDF, and the whole point is to get you to open it so that that malware can then get on your machine.
So you still need to be careful out there, even if on your personal computer or where you work there's antivirus software and other protections, we still have to be careful.
Oh, absolutely. Antivirus software is great, everybody should have it, but it's by no means the end-all be-all. It won't catch everything under the sun.
Because as we're seeing, sophisticated bad actors find ways around it.
Correct.
So let's talk about the story you brought to us, which was about the Air Force and some body cams they purchased that were supposedly made in America, but were not. And they discovered that through someone being very observant. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so a U.S. Air Force serviceman actually just noticed that there was a Chinese character on the built-in screen on one of those body cams and thought it was a little peculiar. So fortunately, the U.S. Air Force has some sort of line of communication where somebody can actually report something like that. And that's in fact what happened. And when they investigated why that character was on the screen, they found that the camera was in fact manufactured not in the United States, but in China, which is a problem because there is a law that prohibits a number of countries from manufacturing products that are then sold to U.S. federal agencies. China is one of those countries that is not allowed to manufacture anything for a federal agency. And
this led to uncovering a whole bunch of other crimes and arrests of people at the company that manufactured this. So it was all because of this observant person noticing something.
Correct.
So any lesson we can take away from that?
The lesson would be supply chain security is as important as it's ever been. Your iPhone comes from a supply line. Your computer at home, made by Microsoft, an American company, comes from a supply line. So it's important that companies and federal agencies vet their supply chains. It's important that the vendors that they're using, that they say that they're doing a certain amount of things, they're doing things a certain way, to make sure that they're actually doing those things. Because in this case, the vendor, which is a company called Aventura, that the U.S. government was using, wasn't in fact being entirely truthful about where their products were actually manufactured.
And if you see something that looks suspicious to you, report it, especially at work if there's a way to report something that you see that's odd.
Absolutely. Even if there's no way to report it, it's important, and I assure you that the security people, the security folks in your organization are going to be very interested in it, and I certainly would be.
Let's talk about the story Matt Kaiser told us about BlueKeepin, and that kind of seems to be counterintuitive to the advice that we give on the show all the time about patching. Just tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. The advice we always give is patch your systems. But in this case, patching your system sort of inadvertently makes it vulnerable to crashing. And how that works is there was a security researcher had developed a Metasploit module. So Metasploit is a framework, an exploitation framework that hackers and pen testers use. It contains a bunch of different exploits in them.
And it can be used for good or bad.
Can be used for good and bad, and is used for good and bad. But this module was developed, and it was developed in a lab that on a machine that actually didn't have what was called the meltdown vulnerability patched. It didn't have the patch that patched that particular vulnerability. So what happened is, in the lab, without that patch, it seemed to work fine. So when that exploit was released in the wild, what was discovered was that when you tried it on a machine that had actually patched for that vulnerability, like you're supposed to, it actually crashed the system, which, you know, it's not as bad because you're not being exploited, but it's still
not good either.
It's still not good because now your system is down. So the trouble is do you push for the updated exploit code, because it is exploit code, so at the very least it won't crash anybody's system, or do you want the bad code out there, the bad exploit out there, so that patch systems don't get exploited, is the conundrum.
So what do we do?
We patch is the right answer. You patch because it's better than being exploited, number one. And I think the most important aspect of this, number two, is BlueKeep has to do with RDP. So I think it's important that
RDP is?
RDP is a remote desktop protocol.
So that access to your machine from remote.
It's a way of controlling your machine from over the internet. Essentially is what it is. It brings up a desktop. It's almost like you're sitting at the computer. If you have those services on the internet, because maybe you own a small business and the technical team that you've hired, that's how they administer the things on your network. If you have something like that running, the important bit is to not leave that just available on the internet. Put some access control lists in front of it. Something that says only these IPs can talk to this service, or put it inside of a VPN network. Which means somebody has to actually VPN into that network to even see it and talk to it. Is the better way to go about it.
Okay, well, thanks for all your advice today, Andy. Thanks for being with us. And thank you for watching. As always, if you want to take a deeper dive into any of these stories, click on the playlist below. And we'll see you next time.